Hi everyone, so in this video I'd like to show you how I painted up a unit of 7 Years War British Infantry using the Tundraworks Miniatures British line. I painted these figures following the color scheme of the 32nd Foot Regiment, and I'll try to link the Chronoscaff page in the description below. Thank you Chronoscaff for providing that information. I actually live streamed most of this painting session on my Twitch channel, which from start to finish only took me about 3 hours. And that was including the time to set up my stream, to run it, and while painting a unit I'm actually not that familiar with. If you know me, you'd know that I'm usually not a British player. But all to say, I'm confident that any painter can pump out a full unit of these guys in a day or less. So, without further ado, let's get started. To make my life easier, I first primed and sprayed these figures with a red base coat. If you have a red primer, you can also directly use that. The first color I usually do is a brown color. I use it to paint both the rifles and the figure's entire head. By doing the entire head, it allows me not to just cover the hair, which is supposed to be brown, but also provide a good base coat for the face, which I'll paint with a flesh color in the next step. I also find it to be a bit easier to do it this way because I don't have to worry too much about where the hair starts exactly and where the face ends. I can just paint pretty and discriminately. Also, because I know these guys will have black hats, I don't have to worry about getting any brown on them, so I can paint upwards and get a good amount of coverage. The next thing I do is use a flesh color to do their faces and their hands. One thing I love about these models is how small the hands are, which make this painting step super fast. It's just one quick dot of paint and that's it. And because we painted their face brown first, I also don't have to worry too much about coverage here. The flesh paint I use is a little thin, so I found the brown layer underneath to really help me with this step. Next up is black. For these models, they have black tricorns, shoes, cartridge box, and the scabbard. Some people skip painting the shoes if they know that they will be covered by the basing. It is optional, but I'm doing them here just for completion's sake. But because of that, I know I don't have to be too careful and I can get as much black as I want onto the base and no one will see them. So that makes this step a little bit easier. After that, we paint the white socks. White is a color that lots of people are very scared of. I actually find them to be okay. The key to it is having the right consistency so they're not looking chalky. You will want them to be as thin as possible as long as they're not runny. But with a good bottle of paint and a wet palette, this shouldn't be too much of a problem. Another part that I'm also painting white here are the laces along the sleeves. But you may notice that I'm actually skipping some white on this model, including the edge of the hats, because I know that I want to get them after inking. As you'll see later in this video, the highlighting step after inking is optional, so if you're skipping that step, you might want to paint the hats now. Now I paint the facings. These models are actually a little bit tricky since their facings are all practically white. To differentiate it from the white that we just used, I used a slightly grayish white just to give some contrast. And the facings on these figures include the cuffs, the turnbacks, and the lapels. I actually love that these models have very exaggerated features. They have really thick cuffs that I can get to easily. The turnbacks are just big triangles, and when I put the paint on, it just naturally takes the shape without much painting, quote unquote, needed. Another thing to note is that since I know I'll be putting the straps on them later, when I'm getting the lapels, I can again be more indiscriminate and just paint their entire chest. One other thing you may not want to forget at this step is that musicians usually have reverse color scheme. So this will be a good time to correct their coat color and paint additional objects like the drum. Now I use a light brown to paint all the leather objects. And that includes the straps, which a lot of people are also terrified of. My trick is to have a good brush that has a very thin tip, but also enough volume such that when you press on the model, you can actually feel the pressure transferred to your hand. Also, it's always good to do it in one smooth motion and don't go back and forth. Here, I'm just using a crimson color to paint the officers' sashes. Believe it or not, this is actually the last step before inking, and that includes all the metal color. I used a steel color to paint the sword and the bayonet, and I used silver to paint the neck plate in front of the officers. I also used gold to paint the tips on the scabbards, which I think really brings out the look. And there you have it, the finished look before inking. I did not record the inking process here, but there are lots of videos out there where you can learn about it. For my style of painting, I used a very generous amount of Nuln oil. That's because I know I want to do a highlighting step to bring out some of those colors after. But if you just want to do it quickly, you can also just use a thinner wash, and that will be your finished models. As mentioned, the following steps are optional, especially if you're already happy with how your models have turned out after the ink. But for these models, I chose to highlight their facing color, which is gray-white, as well as any white lace that is showing, also including the white rim on their tricorns. The only thing you might want to be careful here is painting into any of the crevices that already has ink in it. It's important to only get the flat surfaces and not undo any of the steps you've already done. And there you have it, a full unit of Tundraworks miniatures British Infantry fully painted.